Good afternoon. I hope you guys are having a good day so far, and I hope you're getting ready for your weekend. Today we are going to take the argument making that we've been working on recently, and we're going to move towards writing essays using arguments. The path is a little more like making a good argument, then using that to make an outline, using that to write an essay. But we're going to just focus a little bit on the relationship between arguments and essays today, focusing a little bit um, on the introductory paragraph, what that's made of, and how that helps you figure out what the rest of the essay would be about. So, um, let's consider the kinds of arguments that we've looked at. We had deductive and inductive arguments. Let me share a document with you. Here we go. All right, that made me a lot smaller, but that's okay. Um, so here is a deductive argument. Very simple argument, hard to disagree with, and that's important. That the first premise is that water freezes at 32 degrees. Second premise, the temperature outside is 19 degrees, lower than 32. And the conclusion is that the water in the glass I left outside an hour ago is frozen. Hard to disagree with that, right? Essays have to be about something that people might disagree with you about. And so your job is to convince them. That's the whole point of a persuasive or well, let's just say for now, a persuasive essay. Okay. So it's more like inductive arguments. And you may remember that uh, we were talking about a inductive argument that would be sort of like a criminal trial, right? Where two witnesses saw John breaking into the store. His fingerprints are on the doorknob. John has no alibi for the date and time of the robbery. John probably committed the robbery, right? For essays, especially persuasive essays, you're going to need something, an argument that is more like that. Okay? So, things to know about essays besides that. Essays put the conclusion of the argument before the premises. And you may remember we've talked about that it's fine if the conclusion comes first. You just still need to have premises that support it. Um, but also, the introduction to an essay, the first paragraph, has at least two sentences. The first one is a topic sentence. More about that in a moment. The second is a thesis statement. Okay. And then remember, you still have your conclusion and your premises. Essays use one premise for each paragraph after the introduction. So you have your introductory paragraph, and then one of your premises becomes the basis for the second paragraph. Another premise becomes the basis for the third, and so on. Okay? And then there's a final paragraph that sums your argument up. Let's look. Oh, first off, do you have any questions? Doing well so far? Okay. All right, good. All right, so topic sentences and thesis statements. A topic sentence is the opening sentence to the first paragraph in an essay. It gives the reader a general idea of what the essay is going to be about, um, and ideally, it gets the reader's attention. Um, and then a thesis, but it needs to be general. You're not making your argument usually in the topic sentence. A thesis statement is a sentence that usually comes right after that introductory sentence that hopefully gets the reader's attention. And in that thesis statement, that's your conclusion to your argument, right? You're just stating that right there. So first you say, hey, I'm going to tell you a little something about this. And then you say, here's what I believe to be true. And then the rest of the essay is you going to be explaining why they should believe that. Okay. Um, so here's an example. You could have a topic sentence, the very first sentence in a essay that said something like, tea has long been studied and enjoyed for its healthy effects on people who drink it. Okay. That's not an argument. Right, but it gives me some idea of what I might be reading about. I'm going to read about tea and that it's healthy for people, and maybe something about how or why it's healthy. Then the thesis would be drinking tea has positive effects on a person's overall health because of the chemical compounds it contains. And that because is really important. I'm not going to tell you that every thesis statement has to have that word in it, but that helps you focus because if you're writing because, that's your support. That's at least one premise, right? Um, and you'll see that again as we continue. All right, so if you were writing an essay using these examples, you would probably write, give me enough paragraphs to do a good job of explaining what the compounds in tea are that have effects on my health and what those effects on my health are, right? Okay, so let's go back to thesis statements. Some of them are what we call path statements or thesis path statements. I may use both phrases, so try not to be confused. Um, a path statement style thesis includes the main ideas of all the premises that you're going to use to support, excuse me, your thesis or conclusion. So an example would be taking the time to learn a second language has a lot of advantages, such as improved brain function, career opportunities, and greater cultural understanding. In this case, instead of saying because, I said such as. And it's the same idea. Everything to the right of this these two words, those are all premises on the right. Okay? So we can rewrite that as a argument. Taking the time to learn a second language has a lot of advantages. That's a conclusion. And then all those other things are premises. All right? So the first paragraph would be a topic sentence. I don't have an example of that here. Um, but it would generally introduce what we're going to talk about. And then if you look at the path statement right here, taking the time to learn a second language has a lot of advantages, such as, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell what the second paragraph would be about, just looking at that? Exactly. Improve brain function. Okay, good. So what would the third paragraph be about? Yes, career opportunities. Good. Okay, good. Let's keep going. Um, so let's just, oh, I did want to show you that you might be thinking, okay, but there's a big difference between an essay, which is supposed to be like at least a page long, and an argument, which is just a conclusion and some premises. If you remember back to what I showed you with when we were looking at the Monty Python argument, sometimes a premise can also serve as a conclusion with its own support premises. So I'll give you an example. Um, if the conclusion, let's take the top premise from that, right? Learning a second language improves brain function. All right, let's make that the conclusion. Okay, well, now I have to support that. So one premise could be learning a second language enhances memory, right? Um, and a second one might be, I don't like this one. I'm going to switch it to learning a second language um, enhances brain plasticity, right? The ability of the brain to do more, to stretch itself. Okay, so now you still would have to explain those, but that gives you an idea of how you're going to have more than just a premise, right? That you have to support each premise. All right, let's keep going. Um, Remember this, the writing project planning map? This is just the top of it. And so what we're going to do quickly is to look at first the left-hand column where you're explaining your purpose in writing, okay? Two of these options would be good for the kind of essay I'm talking about, where you're trying to convince somebody, right? Which ones? Right, you're right. But by me saying convince, it becomes obvious. It's either convince someone to do something or to believe something. Good. Okay. Now let's look at my audience. Who should you write for? Remember, please don't write for me, right? That doesn't do you any good. Because sometimes you're going to assume, oh, well, I don't have to explain this because Mr. Stewart knows this. But that doesn't show me that you know how to do this, that you know how to convince somebody of something. So write for a friend, write for a cousin, write for somebody else. Okay. Next thing is right here. Well, I can't highlight this because it's a picture. It's a screenshot. But the second one down under my audience is what do they already know about this topic? If something is so obvious that you don't need to say it, then it doesn't need to be in your essay. All right. If for some reason you were writing something about a new theory about the behavior of ice under extreme conditions or water under extreme conditions, you would not say water is wet. Everybody knows this, right? So figure out, okay, so for the person I'm writing to, what do I need to explain because it's not obvious? Okay, good. Um, and so now let's look at some examples of good and bad thesis statements. So a bad one might be learning another language is great. Notice that's not an argument, okay? A better example is the one we had, and I forgot to make that in italics. Taking the time to learn a second language has a lot of advantages, etc. So let's give you another example. Do you know who William Shakespeare was? Um, Heard of him? Any idea what he did? Good, right? Yeah, he wrote plays. He also wrote poems. But we're going to talk about one of his plays, King Lear. Um, Anybody heard of King Lear? No? Okay, that's all right. So briefly, King Lear was a king. He has his kingdom. He doesn't want to be king anymore. And this doesn't really happen, but he decided that he wanted to just divide his kingdom between his daughters. And he thought this is going to be great because then they won't be jealous of each other. Each one of them gets part of the kingdom. It'll be wonderful. That's not what happened. They started fighting, and the fighting got so bad that the kingdom was destroyed. And when I say destroyed, I mean King Lear is homeless at the end of the play. And it's so bad that he loses his mind. He goes crazy. He's insane. It's not a happy play. All right. So let's look at some possible um, thesis statements. A bad version is William Shakespeare wrote King Lear. I I realize it's kind of sounds like an argument, but it's kind of not because it's too close to water is wet. Although there are a few people who say, well, maybe he didn't write all of it. Most people believe he did, right? So that's not going to work as a thesis statement. Um, a better one would be King Lear is an example of Shakespeare's best writing, but that's not a path statement. You have an argument, but you don't have the premises. So here's another way we could do that. Shakespeare's King Lear is among the best of his plays because of its focus on betrayal, family dynamics, the nature of power, and the consequences of poor judgment. All right? So again, if if this part is the thesis and this is the first premise, so your introduction is going to be a topic sentence about this play, which I didn't give you yet. We'll focus on topic sentences again later. Then your thesis path statement, and that's your introductory paragraph. So your second paragraph is going to be what? Exactly, exactly. It's going to be that first premise, the focus on betrayal. And the third paragraph will be family dynamics and so on. Okay. So now let's go back to topic sentences for introductory paragraphs. Here's some ideas. I think I'm going to get rid of one of them because I didn't like it. So we're not going to include that one. Um, you could have a controversial statement. Uh, For example, some people argue that a college education means a good job with good pay. However, the PhD pumping gas at the corner service station might disagree. That's not an argument, but it is sort of interesting. The guy has a PhD and he's pumping gas? Why? What's going on here, right? So that might grab somebody's attention. Um, then another one would be a quotation from somebody famous, somebody that people are going to respect. All right. So the one I suggested was darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Martin Luther King, right? I didn't start with Martin Luther King. I started with the statement because you want drama. You want to try and, what is this guy talking about? Or this girl, right? Um, you do want to give credit to the person that the quote came from, but start with a quote. Okay. Another possibility is a current event, especially if it's a dramatic current event. Example, a massive outage left nearly 90% of Puerto Rico customers without power. Wow, that's pretty bad. All right. Hopefully it gets people's attention. A few more. Establish proof of your authority. People need a reason to think that you know what you're talking about, right? So let's say that your essay is going to be about checkers, the game, right? Since I recently won the National Checkers Championship, I know a few things about the game, right? So that's an understatement. We've talked about understatements before, and it kind of gets people's attention, right? You know that he knows that whatever you're going to hear from him, that he's an expert. So maybe that makes you believe him. Although remember what we did with when we were studying fallacies about appeal to authority, right? There could still be some issues there. You could open with a rhetorical question. It's the next one. For example, who buys fast fashion? You're not expecting an answer. You're going to answer that question, but we still need an argument. What we would still need to know what your argument is. Sorry, excuse me. One more, use statistics. Since the federal government reduced the speed limit to 55 miles per hour, the national accident fatality rate decreased 25%. That's huge. All right, that's a lot fewer people dying, right? Okay, what's your argument, right? So these are some options, and we'll go over them again, but I want you to try them. And so let's talk about your homework. I'd like you to try to create an introductory paragraph for an essay. You can use any one of the arguments that we've been talking about, or excuse me, any one of the inductive arguments we've been talking about in recent weeks. You can come up with a new one, but want you to try and figure out a topic sentence that gets people's attention, and then a thesis path statement, conclusion, premise, premise, premise. Try to have at least three premises, okay? Um, and remember that a good topic sentence introduces your reader to the general idea and gets their attention. Um, Remember that a good thesis is an argument that starts with a conclusion. So that's the second sentence. Conclusion, premise, premise, premise. A path statement style thesis includes all of the premises. That was redundant. I apologize. You also need to think about making this argument to someone specific. Don't write for me, write for someone specific. Have somebody in mind. And then what do they already know? Okay, what do I need to explain? Right? Keep that in mind. And it needs to be your argument needs to be something that you need to prove. Somebody could disagree with it. All right. So you're not writing an essay, you're writing an introductory paragraph. Um, and we'll practice with outlines and look at what you've got later. But the main thing is first, let's see if you've got the right idea for doing the introductory paragraph, and we'll see how that goes. I'd like you to have that by Monday. All right. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you very much. And I will see you on Monday. Thanks.